Well, we are in week 3 of our series of James, and this morning the title of our message is called Tongue Tamer. And how many of you, like, when you think of a word or you hear a word, like a picture or a memory from your past, like, pops into your head? And so anybody? Okay, so this morning as I was prepping, or not this morning, this week as I didn't do it all this morning, I swear. This week as I was prepping, I decided to name it Tongue Tamer, just because it sounds a little different than control your tongue or power your tongue. And I remember when I thought of that phrase Tongue Tamer, I remember this image in my head from my childhood. I can't remember where exactly it's from, or what it's from, or what. All I remember is this image of a cowboy with a cowboy hat on, and he's got his hand up in the air like he's like riding a horse or whatever, and he's got the rope in his hands, but he's riding a tongue. Like it's a cartoon, but it's an actual tongue, and he's riding on it like he's taming his tongue, right? And I think it's this book of puns that I read when I was in like 2nd or 3rd grade. It talked about, my dad said we're having a chocolate mousse over, and the picture is like them at the dinner table with a mousse made out of chocolate, eating with them at dinner, and kids didn't always understand puns. And so I went online because I wanted to find this image of this cowboy riding a tongue. And when you Google stuff, a lot of times you have something in your head of what you're Googling, and then totally different stuff pops up, right? So I put in Tongue Tamer, and instead of like pictures of cowboys riding on tongues and taming them, I found these medieval Dark Ages devices called tongue tamers. Oh yeah, didn't know they existed. So what they are these little sharp, like plastic, sharp metal tools, apparatuses, I don't know what you call them, but they go in the back of your teeth. And what they are is, I guess there's a problem for people that when their tongue is resting, it's pressing against their bottom teeth. And what it does over time is that forces your teeth out, and it like creates problems for your teeth. And so what this does is it tames your tongue to not push against your teeth. It rests against the top of your mouth instead of your teeth. Now, I had no idea, first of all, that my tongue was supposed to rest on the top of my mouth. And you all are probably right now trying to, like, thinking, where's my tongue right now? Like, because I had no idea. I never thought about it. But when I think about it, my tongue does rest against the roof of my mouth when I'm just sitting or sleeping or whatever. Didn't know that was a thing. So these tongue tamers are these, like, horrible little devices that poke your tongue if you're eating wrong or resting your tongue wrong or whatever, and it pushes your tongue. It trains your tongue to have the good habit of going against the roof of your mouth and resting where it's supposed to be. And so both of those images, I couldn't find the image of the tongue, and of the cowboy riding the tongue, and I'm sparing the image of the inside of somebody's mouth with these tongue tamers on it. But both of these images reflect our duty as believers today. Like, because one, we're supposed to wrestle our tongue into submission, but 2, we're supposed to train it for right behavior, right? And so both the cowboy riding the tongue and the tongue tamer medieval tool of disaster are both things that kind of implement what it is we're supposed to be doing today. And in fact, in James 1:26 says, if you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. James is telling us that we are foolish people if we think that we can follow God and have right relation with Him, but then talk however we want to whoever we want and have no control over our tongue and how we talk to people. In fact, he says that our relationship, we're fooling ourselves if we think that we have good relationship with God, but we treat people horrible with the way we talk our mouths, or way we talk to people or talk to God. We all probably know the famous phrase or quote by St. Francis of Assisi that says, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. Now, can I tell you that words are definitely necessary? No matter what we're doing, whether it's sharing gospel with people or talking with people, our words are completely necessary. In fact, James says that our words are vital. Now, I think we get the gist of what St. Francis was saying, that our lives need to match our words, and if we can't just tell people how good Jesus is and tell people about good things and not follow it up with how we live our lives, but our words are ever so important in our lives as well. And so this morning what we're going to look at, Johnny, hi, how you doing? Hi. This morning what we're going to look at is, why is my tongue so important, and how is that tied to my walk with God? So our first point today is this: my tongue directs me. The reason my tongue is so important and my speech is so important is because my tongue directs me in this life. James 3:3-4 says, we can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. Now, I don't know how many of you have grown up around horses or been around horses in your life, but I have not been around horses much of my life. In fact, earlier in my life, I'd not been around horses like ever, right? I grew up in the thriving metropolis of Washington, Missouri, which is like city folk. No, I'm just joking, but I wasn't really around horses. So the first time I was ever around a horse was probably when I was third or fourth grade. We went to Colorado for vacation, and we went on this horseback ride up in the mountains, and it was wonderful and beautiful. But as a 9 or 10-year-old who'd never been around horses, it was a little daunting to me. And I had my horse Buttercup. I remember Buttercup to this day. He was a grand horse. He's probably glue at this point, but it was a long time ago. But God rest Buttercup. But Buttercup is a great horse, and the one thing I knew is that our instructor, our rancher cowboy guy that was out there, he taught us about how if we want our horse to go to the right, we have to pull on the right rein. If we're going to the left, go on the left rein, and taught us how to do it. And then he proceeded to take this novice 8, 9-year-old on this horseback ride in the mountains where this side is a hill going up and this side is a hill going down. And I'm driving this horse now. You don't drive a horse, I get that. But I'm controlling this horse with this bit. And I remember being a little amazed by the fact that this big, giant beast can be controlled by this little piece of metal or this little piece of wood or plastic that goes into his mouth. It controls this mighty beast of an animal just by how that bit operates in its mouth. And I also remember being really scared of random animals on that trip. I didn't grow up around horses. Horses weren't a thing of my childhood. And so I remember being scared that we would be walking down the path and a rabbit would jump out and run away. And I think I thought the horse would chase the rabbit like my dog would, because I didn't know. We had a big dog and he would chase rabbits, and I thought, what if this horse sees a rabbit and just tears off after the rabbit, which I realize now is silly, obviously. But I also remember thinking, because when I would take the trash out as a kid, sometimes there'd be a possum outside. And possums in and of themselves aren't super scary. They're kind of creepy looking. But when you're 8 or 9, bring the trash out, and one surprises you and yells at you, it's a little scary. And so I remember thinking, what if I see a possum, and this horse is and the horse decides to run away from the possum? Now, meanwhile, I have learned in my older years that horses could care less probably about rabbits or possums. But in my young mind, I thought that was a problem. I realize now I had a very unhealthy fear of random animals being close to my horse. But I was amazed how just a little tug on this rope on the rein would move the horse where it was. And we went down the whole path, the cliff was on the downhill was on this side. And so we kind of walked the trail like this, I kept trying to make him go closer to the upward hill. Anyway, but I was amazed that a giant muscular beast could be controlled by this small piece of metal. In the same way, if you've ever been on a boat, you have this water vehicle that can go fairly fast on the water. And yet this tiny piece of wood or this tiny piece of plastic in the back, just turning that a little bit changes the whole course of where this boat is going and the direction that it's going in. And it's amazing to see how those small things like a bit and a rudder can change the course of a mighty boat, a mighty beast. And so it's just interesting. And that is the word pictures that James gives us for our mouth. Because our mouth is a small thing when it comes to our body, but it's a powerful thing. It's petite, but it's powerful, right? I know some teenagers that are petite and powerful. We won't get into Abby Claycamp. She's a powerful young lady, but she's a petite little thing. But I will not mess with her, even though I'm a big grown man, because there she is. Sorry, Abby. Just forgive me. Okay. But our tongues are a petite but powerful thing that can have a big impact on our lives and where we head in life. See, our words, our tone, our responses, all have a big impact on the world around us. The things we say, but even more than the things we say, also the way we respond to people and the tone in which we do things often plays out a lot of times. I know the thing I talk with teenagers about sometimes is how they will like to say certain things to me, their spiritual authority, or their parents, and I'll talk to them about not their words, but their tone. All I said was this, that's not bad. I was like, I get it, that in itself, those words aren't bad, but the tone in which you said it was so disrespectful and so rude. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you understand. Like, the words themselves might not be okay. Hayden understands. I have kids, yeah. But the tone can be just as bad as the words you're saying in yourself. And it has an impact on the people around you. See, I'm not talking about a careful what you say because it's going to come true, like a weird, like genie magic thing. I believe in the power of words, but Jeff Perry is a pastor in St. Louis. He told a story one time about he was in Chicago and they walked this big flight of stairs. And Chicago is windy. Called the Windy City, but the wind was blowing really hard. And he made a statement of like, man, this wind is blowing so hard it's going to blow me over. And there was a lady in the group that said, oh, Pastor Jeff, don't say that. Like, if you speak that into existence, then the wind will blow you over. And so I'm not talking about that type of like genie, like magic. Our words have magic of like, if we speak it, it's going to happen. But our words do have power in our lives. Not in a weird way, but they have power in our lives. So if you are somebody that always speaks down and is always negative in the way that you talk, and you always see the worst possible outcome, you're kind of a pessimist when it comes to the way you talk about things, that's going to influence how you see the world around you. If you see negative and you talk about negative in everything you do, you're going to begin to see all the negative stuff that's going on in the world around you, and that's going to impact your world, but it's also going to impact the world around you. Because I know, like, I love to talk to most people, but if there's somebody that's always talking negative and always talking down, and it's always kind of like, when you have a conversation with them, it's like, oh, it just drags you down. Who wants to be around that all the time? That's the person when you happen to see them at Walmart, you quickly go in the other aisle like, oh, Lord. And, you want to hide from that because nobody wants to be around somebody that's talking negative and talking down all the time. Another way that our words can impact us is if you always respond with sarcasm or passive aggressiveness, how many of you know that can affect your relationships? And I say this as a personal confession that I may tend to be a little bit sarcastic and passive aggressive. And I'm telling you from my place of sincerity, usually that's a trick word, usually that's coming from a place of trying to be funny or trying to be fun. A lot of people that are close to me know that my love language is giving people a hard time. And so that's how I show affection and love to people. But I also know that usually doesn't mean always. And so sometimes that sarcasm, sometimes that passive aggressiveness is something that I might mean for funny most of the time, but not all the time. But it causes a problem and affects the relationships of people around me, right? It has an impact on people. And it's something that I need to fix, and maybe that's something that you need to fix it as well. See, our mouth can often push us in directions that we may not be wanting to go. And it may affect the relationships around us in a way that we don't want to be affected. And here's the thing, and I've realized this in my own life when it comes to sarcasm and stuff like that. Like, if everybody has a problem with something I'm saying, it's probably not a problem with everybody else. It's probably a problem with me, right? Even if you mean it well, even if you didn't think it was that bad, if everybody else is having a problem, then the problem probably lies with me. And that's something I realize that's something we need to realize if our words and our mouth is getting us or putting us in situations that we really don't want to be in. See, our tongue can either work for us or it can work against us. We all know, I think, how our tongue can work for us. Like, if you met your spouse, like at some point you had to lay some words on you had to woo her, right? You had to woo her or him, and you're like, hey, baby. When I met Laura, I had great riz, and I was like, hey, girl, me and you should be a couple. No, it was really actually kind of awkward, and somehow by the grace of God, she said yes to me after my fumbling around. She says I stalked her. I wouldn't call it stalking. It's just love. It's just love. Okay. So we all know how our words can be good for us, and we all have seen how words can be bad for us as well. How many of you have ever been in a situation, not you, of course, but as you're watching somebody else, you see them responding or a tone or using words, and you're like, oh, Lord. In your head, you're like, please stop. Like, you see the destruction that's happening as they're saying it, and you're like, oh, Lord, stop them. Stop them. Oh, too late. And you have that, like, secondhand cringe where you're like, oh, you're embarrassed for them that they said that, and you're like, oh, why did they do that? Like, why did they not shut up? And like, we get in that spot because we see how words can work against us as well. We must be people that decide to either direct our tongue or our tongue will direct how we live our lives and how our lives turn out. See, this thing here is called my phone. It is my this used to be used just to call people, but now this is used to do all sorts of things, right? With this thing, I can send you an email. I can buy presents with this on Amazon. I can video chat my son when he's in Italy in September. I got to have a video chat with him. I can destroy towers and kill bad guys when I play games on this thing. I can lose fantasy football every week on this thing. Yeah, Dylan, thanks for beating me the other week. But this thing can do a lot of things. It can do a lot of really great things. It can do a lot of really bad things. And how I control this is this thing right here. This finger. My thumbs are too fat. I got fat fingers. So my index finger controls, and I'm older, so it controls basically everything that happens on my phone. Now, the reason I point that out is because this can be used for good or bad, and this finger could be used for good or bad. That sounds weird, but I could do good or bad things with this finger on the phone. And so the power of good and bad is right there. It's laid there. We have to choose how we're going to direct how we use our phone, how we're going to use our index finger when we're on our phone, the same way we need to direct how we're going to use our words. Because our words can be good or our words can be bad, but we have to be mindful and take control of how we're going to direct those things. Otherwise, they will direct us as well. If we don't gain control of our tongues, here's the second thing. My tongue can destroy. If we don't get control of it, then destruction is what comes whenever we lose control or don't choose to take control. James chapter 3, verses 5 through 8 says, "In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. People can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil, full of deadly poison." A few years ago, we had a high school camp out at our farm. We had a bonfire and snacks, went swimming, just had a good time. Saturday morning, when Laura got up and made breakfast for the students, we went into the kitchen at the farm. It's an old farmhouse. One of those that every time we came over the hill, we're like, oh, it's still standing. It's like old and decrepit, but it was awesome for us. And we went in, I turned on the lights, and it popped. It's like, oh, light bulb went out. Like, that happens. It's an old house, but it's like 10-foot ceiling, so it's like, I'm not getting up there, I stay on the ground. And so not going to change that. Didn't think anything of it. We went outside. We had breakfast. We had a little dance party. I don't know what happens at high school camp out stays at high school camp out. But anyway, the next day, we went swimming with my dad, and he told me that somebody went up to the farm on Sunday morning to mow the grass, and the whole house had burned completely down to the ground. And me being the trusting son that I was, like, Dad, you're lying. Whatever, like, stop it, figuring he was harassing me because we were the last ones up there. And so he's like, no, I'm serious. So Laura and I drove up to the farm, and we saw the damage that we had done. We cooked a wonderful breakfast for students and burned down the house. We brought it down into a heap of ashes and metal. And we've realized probably what happens when I flipped the switch, that it probably set off a little spark, and that old house and all the mice nested in there, that spark, that ember, that spark turned into a spark, and it smoldered. And at some point, it caught fire and burned the whole thing down to the ground. And it was a sad day, and I'm not allowed to have campouts at the farm anymore for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe I can talk to my dad later about that. But it caused a lot of damage. And James says the same thing happens with our tongue. Our tongue is like a spark that can set a fire that can destroy things around us. And he goes into some details there, like it brings a firestorm. It's because our tongues are from hell, like it sparked from the evilness of hell, and all this kind of stuff. This imagery of like the power that our tongue has to be destructive in the world around us. The power that our tongue has to be destructive in our own lives. See, our tongue can be used and cause so much damage. It can be used to incite anger. It could be used to stab people in the back. It could be used to pierce to the very core of somebody's soul. For many of us in this room right now, we could probably close our eyes and think back to a year ago, think back to 10 years ago, think back to our childhood, and think of a time that that somebody said something very hurtful to you. It was just words, but it cut you to the core. And to this day, you can close your eyes and you can think about that memory. Maybe it's something somebody said to you. Maybe it's overhearing your parents argue and hearing something they said to each other. And it sticks with you because words are powerful. And a lot of times, words are spoken in anger. Our parents have, harsh conversations with each other. And the reality is that when our tongues are left to run wild and unrestrained, destruction follows that. And that's part of the reason we can think back of what somebody said. I remember in 4th or 5th grade, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I remember my latchkey teacher told me one day after school when I was waiting to get picked up, he said, "Dylan, you're about as graceful as a water buffalo." And I grew up, like I said, without horses or water buffaloes. I didn't know exactly what that meant in my world, but I knew that I didn't like it. And here I am, an older gentleman. Sorry, Dick. Older gentleman. And I realized that for whatever reason, I don't even know what that means, but it affected me and it kind of hurt me. To the point that immediately when he said it, I went down to the other side of the gym and I did like 10 layups in a row. And I came back and was like, if I'm as graceful as a water buffalo, how come I just made 10 layups? He's like, "You're still graceful as a water buffalo." I'm like, "Oh, it hurt so bad." And I didn't even know what it meant, but I knew that it hurt. A kind lady, she's not here second service, but she come up to me afterwards. She said, "When I was in Germany, I grew up in Germany, and when I was in Germany, we used to go to buffalo parks. It was kind of like a zoo, but over there it's buffaloes. And Dylan, I just want you to know that buffaloes are so nice, and they're so graceful. They're powerful, graceful animals." I was like, "I appreciate it, but I'm okay." Like, you don't have to make up a buffalo. But it was kind. But I was like, I'm okay. It's not affecting me that long. But we can probably close our eyes and think of a time and remember words that were said in anger towards somebody. And even the most restrained person, like even the most restrained that would never say something wrong, in moments of high stress or moments of anger or frustration, sometimes even then, the most restrained person can lose control and say stuff. And a lot of times, when we say stuff in anger or in stress, we probably don't really mean it. We just feel like we're being hurt, and so we want to hurt back, and we don't mean to say it, but we say it. But I think there are some times that we say things, and we know exactly what it is that we're doing. We know exactly, like, I'm getting ready to say this, and I say it, and I know it's going to cut them to the core. And if it's too bad, I can say, "Well, I'm sorry, I was angry, I didn't mean to say that." But we know in the moment that we did mean to say it. And that's something that can cause some destruction in our lives and the lives of the people that we're in a relationship with. Men, I just want to talk to you real quick. I'm a man. I was going to talk to women too, but I can't talk to women. I can talk to women. Never. You get what I'm saying. I'm a man, so I can give some correction here. Men, we have to do better. Men, we have to learn to talk to people in our lives. Talk to spouses, talk to our children, talk to our parents, talk to whoever it is. We must learn to talk to people and not yell at people. We must learn to be open with people that we care about and talk to them and not allow things to bottle up to where we do eventually explode and have, like, destruction come forth from our mouth. It's never okay, men, for us to name call people. It's never okay for us to body shame people. It's never okay for us to verbally attack our families. That's not okay. We are called to love and to protect our families, not to set things ablaze. We're supposed to be a strength for our families, for our spouses. We need to be people that encourage, build up, and speak life into our families. Now, I'm only going to speak to men because I'm not going to go the other route and talk about what women need to do. But here's the thing. I'm talking this to men, but James says all of us need to be doing this. Every single one of us need to be mindful of what we're saying, who we're saying it to, how we're saying it, the tone we're saying it, how we respond in the good times and the bad times. We all need to understand the destruction that an unchecked tongue can have if we're not making it follow and be obedient to God. Verses 7 through 8 tells us the list of different animals that can be tamed. It says that kinds of animals can be tamed, and birds and reptiles and fish, and all these different animals can be tamed. But he says that no one can tame the tongue. You go on YouTube and people tame like bears to do things and like cats and dogs. Like one of the things we love to do in our house is to watch YouTube, and every once in a while we'll just watch a bunch of like dog tricks and stuff like that. Dogs just being crazy or learning things, and it's fun to watch. Like you can tame beasts to do all kinds of things. But James says that no one can truly tame their tongue. And I believe that in our own strength that is true. There's nothing we can do in our own strength to tame our tongue by ourselves. We could never do it alone. And even with God's help, we may never ever have fully perfect tongues because we're still imperfect people. We strive for perfection, but we're not going to be perfect. God is going to help us. Holy Spirit's going to help us, and that's going to do great things for us in our walk, in our efforts to tame our tongue. But we're still people. We're still going to mess up. We're still going to make mistakes. But thank God that He has grace for us, right? He doesn't expect perfection, but He does expect us to do our best to be obedient to Him and to follow after Him. Now, just because we can't tame it on our own doesn't mean we have a free ticket to stop trying. That it's okay to keep on cursing and yelling and hurting. No. Like, just because we can't do it on our own doesn't mean that we just give up and allow our tongue to run our lives. No, we need to do our best because we know that with God, we can tame our tongues. And with Him, it's possible in our lives if we allow Him to help us. And we talked earlier about how He wants to help us. Like when we go to God and ask Him to help us, ask Him for wisdom, it says that when we ask with a heart that wants true change, when we ask with a true heart, with a true faith, that He will give us the things that we need. And so when we're asking for God to help us be obedient to Him, we know that God is on our side, and He wants to help us in that process. He wants us to make us a little bit better. We've been talking in this series on James about how when we look at the Word of God, it's like looking at a mirror, and we can look at our lives and say, man, there's some things wrong with my life because my reflection is not matching up to what the Word of God says I should look like. And because of that, we can take that and we can allow God and ask God, God, help me with my mouth. Help me to not respond in anger. Help me, like the Scripture says, help me be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to speak, so I don't just fly off the handle and say stuff without thinking. We can ask God for help in our lives and allow Him to do a mighty work in our mouth. But here's another thing I think is important for us to understand as a reason as why we can't truly tame our tongue. We talked about the phone while ago, right? And we talked about how you can do a lot of good stuff and a lot of bad stuff with your phone. And you have your phone, you have your index finger, your fingers to type it into. But how many of you know that my phone in itself doesn't make bad things happen? And even my finger in itself it's a mighty finger, but it doesn't make, like my finger is not good or bad in itself. What happens is my finger and what I do on my phone is a reflection of my heart. So one of the reasons I can never truly tame my tongue is because my tongue is an overflow of my heart. Matthew 12:34 says, "You brood of snakes, how could evil men like you speak what is good and right? For a man's heart determines his speech." It's impossible for me to ever truly tame my tongue if I don't have a heart that's following after God. If my heart is far from God, then I'm not going to be able to tame my tongue because out of the abundance of my heart, my mouth is speaking. See, James is talking to the Pharisees here, but he drops that truth bomb for every one of us. That what comes out of our mouth is a reflection of what's going on in our heart. So if you're always saying hateful things and you're always showing no mercy, no compassion to people around you in the way that you talk about them or the way you talk to them, maybe one of the issues we're having is that we have a heart that needs to be corrected by God. If a tongue is a reflection of a heart, then the third point here is that my tongue shows who I really am. My tongue shows what's going on in my heart. If I'm letting stuff fly all the time, if I'm saying certain things all the time, then there's really something in my heart that needs to be corrected. James 3:9-12 says, sometimes it praises talking about the tongue here, sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. Does a spring of water bubble out from both fresh water and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? No. And you can't draw fresh water from a salty spring. Fresh water does not flow out of a salty spring. Wow. Like that's the heart of it right there. We can't have good words, good actions with our mouth, good tone, good responses to people in good times and bad if it's coming from a salty place. Fresh water doesn't flow from a salty source. Our tongues will never be tamed if our heart isn't right. A mouth that praises God and worships him here at church, but then goes and tears down and curses those that are made in his image, James says is not right. I know a lot of times we want to have two mouths. Maybe it's a mouth we use at church or around our church friends or people we respect or whatever. Like we want to talk a certain way in front of them. But then we're at Walmart and have to deal with the cashier, or when we're going through the drive-thru, or that person cuts you off in traffic again. Like, we can't have two different tongues. We can't talk one way here and how we're supposed to talk, and then talk freely and do whatever we want other places. James says that we can't have that double-tongued type of talk coming from us. It's plain and simple. We may want to, but we only have one tongue that is going on for each one of us. And he says that praises for God and curses for his people cannot coexist. The believer's tongue cannot be an instrument of inconsistency in our lives, because here's the deal. If you're trying to have two tongues, eventually your tongue will expose the hypocritical lifestyle that you've been living. You know, people, when you invite people to church, when you talk to people about coming to church and about how good God is, you can't tell people about that and then at lunch break gossip about your boss or tear down your boss or coworker and criticize them and tear them down. That doesn't work. Like when you talk that way about people, and then an hour later you invite them to church, you're like, the hypocrisy comes forth at that point. Do we see that? Do we understand that this morning? Like we can't have it both ways. And that goes for all kinds of sinful speech that comes out of our mouth. Harsh, unkind, lying, exaggeration, false teaching, slander, gossiping, hateful comments, dirty jokes, selfish boasting. There's so much bad that can come out of our mouth, but there's so much good that can come out as well. What we got to do, like the phone, there's good and bad you can do in the phone. There's good and mouth that can happen with your tongue, but it's got to come from a heart that's pure and a heart that wants to be obedient to God. It is about looking for spiritual maturity and growing in spiritual maturity. An unchecked heart and thoughts leads to unchecked tongues. If we don't control what we're thinking about, if we let our hearts just run amok, then our mouth is going to run amok. But a controlled heart and thought leads to controlled tongues. Now in our lives, taming the tongue is going to be a nonstop battle. It's probably going to be something we always struggle with because we're never going to reach perfection here on this side of heaven. We're never going to get to the point where I'm never going to say anything wrong again, because at any moment I could get frustrated, and if I'm not careful, I can let things slip, or if my heart's not right, if my heart's a little distant from God, I can let things slip or say things that cut and hurt people. But we have God on our side. And I'm thankful that we don't fight the way the world fights, right? We have some tools. 1 Corinthians 10, 3 through 6 says, the world is unprincipled. It's dog eat dog out there. The world doesn't fight fair, but we don't live or fight our battles that way. Never have and never will. The tools of our trade aren't for marketing and manipulation, but they are for demolishing that entire massively corrupt culture. We use our powerful God tools for smashing warped philosophies, tearing down barriers erected against the truth of God, fitting every loose thought and emotion and impulse into the structure of life shaped by Christ. Our tools are ready at hand for clearing the ground of every obstruction and building lives of obedience into maturity. We don't fight the same way the world fights. When somebody says something to you, the reaction is to retaliate, to say the next mean thing, the meaner thing, to kind of win that war of words in the way that we're talking to people. That's how the world fights. That's not how we're called to fight. We're given some God-powered tools to help us be better at taming our tongue and ultimately getting our heart right with Him. First of all, we have a God who loves us and wants a personal relationship with each one of us. Look, we're not in a situation where there's a God who created us and just put us on earth and said, here you go, have fun. I don't want anything to do with you. We have a God who loves us. We have a God who wants personal relationship with us. We have a God that is concerned about the things that are going on in my life, in our lives, right? He wants the best for us. He's on our side. He's fighting for us. He's not against us. He is for us, and He wants us to have a good life here on earth. And we talked earlier about how last week or two, we talked about how God's on our side, and when we ask Him for things, He wants to give us wisdom. He wants to give us help that we need. And so when it comes to taming our tongue, When it comes to making sure that our heart is pushing out spring water instead of salty water, we can ask God for help. And he says that he will help us because he is on our side. He wants the best for us. He wants us to grow. It says that he is on our side, but he's also the author and the finisher of our faith. He didn't begin a work in us and just say, okay, now it's up to you to finish it. Because I tell you what, I'm not going to do a good job finishing it if God's not helping me. He's the author and the finisher. He wants to help me in my walk. He wants to help me move me to a place where I'm becoming more obedient and that I'm growing spiritually and I'm maturing spiritually as a follower of him. As we continue to fight for spiritual maturity, he is fighting right alongside us, helping us every step of the way. I'm going to have the worship team go ahead and come up. We're getting ready to close here, but here's the next power tool we have in our belt. We also have the power of the Holy Spirit. A constant reminder to help us, to guide us, to show us the right way, to show us how to be obedient, to show us how to mature spiritually. And each one of us has a choice. Are we going to listen to his guidance, or are we going to suppress it and kind of push it away? And the problem is, the more that we suppress it, the more that we push it away, the harder it can become to hear the Holy Spirit in our lives. We reach a point that if we tell him no long enough, he's going to stop trying. It's going to become harder to hear him because we're not listening for the Holy Spirit. He's still talking to us, but because we've suppressed him for so long, we don't hear his voice as good as we should. He wants to give us guidance in life. The third thing we have is we have a community of people to help us if we utilize that people of community. As we look around this room right now, we have First Service, we have Union Campus, we have Pacific Campus going on this morning. But as we look around this room, we see a body of believers that I believe for the most part, we want to help each other. If you have a problem, if I have a problem, if we have a problem, we can go to each other and ask for help. We can go to each other and talk some things out, work some things out. We have to be people that utilizes the community that we were built to be a part of. We're built to be a part of a community, and so we must utilize that because we're not meant to go at it alone. We're not meant to be obedient and to work on our spiritual maturity by ourselves. We need people to help us along the way. We need iron to sharpen the iron that is going on. Here's the last thing, the last power tool we're going to talk about this morning. We have his word. We have the word of God. We have that mirror that we can hold up to our lives. And if we see stuff that's wrong in that reflection, if we see stuff in our lives that don't match up with what should be in the mirror, we have the opportunity to correct it. We can make it right. We need to read the word. We need to know the word. We need to live by the word. I have a few verses. Let's go ahead and stand up on our feet this morning. I have a few verses this morning that, and if you look through the Bible, you have all kinds of verses on your tongue, but I have a few I picked out this morning just to kind of reminders for us. 1 Peter 3:10 says, "For the scriptures say, if you want to enjoy life and see many happy days, keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies." Peter tells us if we want to enjoy life and have happy days, stop lying to people and stop speaking evil to people. If we control our tongues, we can have a life that we enjoy, and we can have blessing and happy days in our future. Do we want blessings? Do we want happy days? Do we want long life? Watch how we use our tongues. Watch how we talk to people. Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone." Imagine if our conversation was good conversation, speaking grace to people, compassion to people, speaking life into people, encouraging people. That's the type of tongue, that's the type of speech we should have in our lives. And that has a huge impact on everybody else around us. Proverbs 17:9 says, "Whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends." Are you the type of friend? Are we the type of friends that when we hear a rumor or a gossip that we're going to talk more about it? We're going to spread that gossip? We're going to tell more people about it? Or are we going to cover it with love and say, well, you know what? Even if that's true, we don't need to be talking about that person that way. Even if that is true, I'm not going to talk about my friend that way, okay? And if you think it is true, you can go talk to your friend about it. Because our mouth needs to cover offenses with love and not repeat and gossip about people in our lives. Matthew 15:11 says, "What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." The things that come out of our mouth is what causes our problems. And the bad things that come out of our mouth is a reflection of a heart that may not be in tune with God. In fact, if we tame our tongues, we tame our tongues by bringing our heart in line with God's heart. The way that we control our tongue, the way that we tame it, is by making sure that our heart is right with God. To making sure that the way that we're living, the way that we're thinking is aligned with the Word of God. It's aligned with what He tells us to do, and that we're being obedient to Him as we live our lives. We allow spiritual maturity to have its way and have its day in our lives. Now, this morning, we talked a lot about our tongue. And I think that every one of us in this room, if we're going to be honest, could probably respond in a way this morning and say, Lord, help me with my tongue. Maybe it's your tone. Maybe you don't even think about it. You just let your tongue run wild and you say whatever pops in your head all the time. Maybe the way you talk to your spouse needs to change. Maybe the way you talk to your kids or talk to your parents needs to change. Parents of teenagers, do our kids need to watch their mouth sometime? Okay, I'll just leave that one alone. Teenagers, I'm telling you, we need to watch how we talk to our parents. We need to watch how we talk to everybody. So this morning, as we respond, I want us to respond. I'm going to have the prayer team come up here in a moment. And if you need prayer this morning for your tongue, in reality, if you need prayer for your heart this morning, so that you could have a better chance of taming your tongue, I'm going to ask you to come forward. We're not going to ask you exactly what it is. You can share with whoever's praying with you. You can share whatever you want to share with them. And if you have another prayer need, illness, or somebody, if you have any kind of need this morning, you can come and get prayer. But I want this morning to be an opportunity for us to respond to the teaching and put action action to the faith that God is going to make a difference, and come and get prayer if you feel like it's something that you need this morning. Before we do that, before we have the prayer team lead, I'm going to ask everybody just to bow your heads and close your eyes real quick. I don't want to leave this room without giving people an opportunity to be right with God. And I know that in this room there are people in all different levels and all different stages in their walk with God. Some people are plugged into God and they love God. Some people are newer in their faith and they're learning and they're growing, and that's great. Some people in the room, you might not have a relationship with God at all. Or maybe you've been testing the waters, you've been thinking about it, you just have not been ready to make that decision, that call. And maybe today is the day that you want to give your heart to God. So if you're in the room today and you'd say, Dylan, today I want to give my heart